61 years after the assassination of President Kennedy, the government still maintains the discredited lone gunman explanation of Lee Harvey Oswald as the alleged assassin. Why do they continue to hide the pertinent facts of the crime of the century?
It's an incredible story, if you think about it. And there's nothing really that parallels it in history where a government withholds information for 61 years.
And keeps holding it.
Yeah, on such an important case, the presidency and the removal of a president. So we know on our side, when we think about this, it's become a punchline, and everything about how the government would lie about something always goes back to the JFK assassination, things like the magic bullet, for example. And so the discredited Warren Commission, interestingly enough, turned 60 in September. And it's quite fascinating because when you think about what they came out with, it was 888 pages. But there was nothing in it that said anything beyond, this is a lone gunman, he got away with it, he got around Secret Service, and all the questions about the autopsy of President Kennedy, the unusual surroundings, the Secret Service stand down, all of these unusual things were just left out. And they got into interviewing all of these people and going deep into the minutia and obscured the case. And at the end of the day, they said, oh no, there was nothing there to see except Oswald somehow got a job on the parade route of the president's limousine 6 weeks before President Kennedy was going to go down that parade route, even though nobody knew he was coming. So the extraordinary coincidence is a little too much of a coincidence, and it spurned how many conspiracy theories? Well, that's interesting too, because those have been managed, as we'll see. And when you get to the actual truth of what was happening that day for President Kennedy, we're going to find out that he was heading somewhere to speak to a certain person, and it's on the record, and they were going to give a speech together. And that brings us to kind of the place we are today, which is about the final speech that he never gave.
Who was physicist Lloyd Berkner, and why was JFK on his way to the Dallas Trade Mart to give the major speech with him in a large ceremony just before he was assassinated?
This is interesting because of all the details that we hear about in network specials and historical overviews and everything else about the JFK assassination. You always hear about, he was going there to mend fences politically and this and that, but what was he actually going to do? What was he on the way to do when he got assassinated there in Dealey Plaza? And the truth of that is quite fascinating because the person he was going to meet is a character that I've focused on in my own research because he shows up as this kind of Zelig type figure throughout history, and his name is Lloyd Berkner. Now, I dug into the background of that ceremony that was going to take place at the Trade Mart. And the Trade Mart, I can say this also, it's an unusual place for President Kennedy to have gone because of the multiple security holes there. There's so much in and out and easy access for somebody who would be an assassin, for example. But it was all set up and it was going to be a major speech. And what I found out was that Berkner, after the fact, wrote to his students there and said, we are very disheartened by this. President Kennedy was going to have given a speech here with international implications that were staggering. So then I got very curious about the speech and his final speech that he never got to give. And it was absolutely powerful, the amount of obfuscation around that speech and how it was moved through various channels till it didn't show up until 1969. And when it showed up, suddenly it was a pro-nuclear, pro-war, completely un-Kennedy speech that didn't make any sense. So his actual speech disappeared into the ether, and I got very curious about it.
Until you were able to locate it.
Yeah, this is the interesting thing. And when we get into that speech, as we're going to get to tonight, we're going to see the reason that he's meeting with Berkner is because he has something very huge to announce. And it relates to technology, it relates to space, and it relates to some of the background that Berkner had. And that's going to lead us into Berkner's background. What I want to say about Berkner right off the bat is that this is someone who at the age of 22 went to Antarctica with Admiral Byrd and his famous expedition. And as a radio operator, he set up Little America in Antarctica before anyone really had done anything extensive there in terms of expeditions. He was there for 2 years with Byrd. So we already have a very unusual character in terms of his background. And Byrd, when he writes his book about Little America and his expedition, the actual note inside the book and who it's dedicated to is Berkner, who he says, thank you for your loyal companionship. Thank you for, being able to do this incredible mystery with me. So we know instantly their relationship goes on a deep level in terms of the type of secrecy that was required in that mission. And Berkner, at the age of 22, as a radio whiz, shows up there in history. And as we follow and track him through history, he shows up also again in World War II. And he shows up in 1952 heading up the Robertson Panel, which is the first major CIA investigation of the UFO file. So even though it's the Robertson Panel, many people said, well, Berkner actually led it. So they're tapping this guy along the way. He's Antarctica, he's the UFO file, and then he sets up in 1957 the International Geophysical Year. And the IGY, as they called it, was absolutely revolutionary for its time because it brought all these scientists together to go to Antarctica and measure the ionosphere. So he's in the middle of that. He's in the middle of the Robertson Panel. He's in the middle of the Byrd expedition. And then he's the person that President Kennedy is going to meet at the Trade Mart as he's about to be assassinated.
There's a lot of parallels there.
It's something else. It's incredible.
So what was Majestic 12 or MJ12 UFO secrecy group, and how was Lloyd Berkner involved?
This is interesting because Berkner, there were a series of documents that came out in the 1980s that were called Majestic 12, and it was all about a group of 12 individuals who managed the UFO file. Now, the documents themselves have been verified over the years, and then other documents that imitated them came out to kind of obfuscate what was going on there. But what's fascinating is I went into the history of a physicist who was working on a very deep level with the subject of the UFO file. But he was a respected physicist in the 1950s named Robert Sarbarger. And, we talk about the Oppenheimer movie that came out last year. This guy was on the same level as Oppenheimer, and he's on the cover Time magazine. He's the celebrated physicist. But his story goes underground as soon as he starts talking about the UFO file. And as a matter of fact, you can't find a Wikipedia page on this guy now. So he's been kind of rubbed out of history. But what he said basically backed up exactly what the Majestic 12 file said, which is that there was a group that studied the UFO file, managed it, managed the technological innovation of it, and passed that secrecy along. And what he was upset about by the 1980s is very interesting. Because when you get to the 80s, he's saying, why hasn't all this been released? I was working on it in the 1950s. He meets a very unusual end, interestingly enough, as a lot of the people involved in that level of secrecy around the UFO file get into. And when we talk about the UFO file, we talk about it from a couple of different angles because very often people go to the ET level. They're instantly thinking, well, it's an alien visitation or whatever it would happen to be. But I think what we can do here is combine that with the idea that we're also talking about an advanced group here working technologically in the background. And that's where I think Berkner is going to lead us a trail of breadcrumbs to find that out.
As he already is.
As he is. Little did he know.
More on to him. So what is the deep connection of the famous Antarctic explorer, Admiral Richard Byrd, to Lloyd Berkner, the JFK assassination?
This is fascinating because Byrd takes Berkner under his wing at a very early age, as we mentioned. 22. And if you think about your experiences at 22, going to Antarctica for 2 years is pretty incredible. Leave quite a mark on your life. But what I found when I was dealing with Berkner and Byrd is that over and over again, including the fact that they both went back to Antarctica in 1956, was quite fascinating. It showed that relationship continued on. But the relationship as it gets into the JFK assassination is quite interesting because everywhere I looked into the crime of the JFK assassination, I kept finding people associated with two things, the UFO file and Antarctica. And I tried to put together, why would Antarctica be a part of it? But I'll give you an example. So when Lee Harvey Oswald signs up for a job at the Texas School Book Depository, and we're here at the 61st anniversary of the crime of the century, last century, he's walking in and signing up for a job, and the owner of the building is someone who heads up an experimental aerospace company named LTV, Ling Temco Vout. And that company, it's very interesting, I'll say this as an aside, they invested $3 million shortly before the Kennedy assassination. And they ended up being one of the largest Vietnam War contracts, making all of these various aerospace devices. So that $3 million investment from the owner of the Texas School Book Depository, who owned LTV, turned into $55 million by 1965. Think about the money, that kind of money in 1965. That's an incredible increase. But this is the kind of things that you can see in the background of that. But this character, D.H. Byrd, who owned the Texas School Book Depository, where the shots were fired from, allegedly, in the Warren Commission, his name was David H. Byrd, but they called him Dryhole Byrd because he was an oil man. And he was the cousin of Admiral Byrd, who'd done the famous Antarctica expeditions. He was also the cousin of Harry Byrd, who was the senator who headed up all the NASA funding. So we're in an interesting place, I think, with this guy, right off the bat, that there's an Antarctica connection as soon as they make that turn onto Elm Street from the limousine where the shots are fired. They're going right past a building that D.H. Byrd, whose cousin discovered Antarctica, those shots are coming from there. So D.H. Byrd, it turns out, funded all the expeditions to Antarctica. He's the main funder. As a matter of fact, there's something called D.H. Byrd Mountain in Antarctica. Well, that's the owner of the Texas School Book Depository. So when we get into it now, we're looking at an unusual figure who is connected deeply with Lyndon Baines Johnson. So that is the person who will assume the presidency when President Kennedy is assassinated. So you can see we're in deep waters once you start looking at it past the Warren Commission and past the superficial media treatment. You're dealing with very deep players. And obviously Antarctica is where the kind of high technology aspect comes in. But Byrd with LTV was already, this is an experimental aerospace company. And my basic thing around the JFK assassination is it's all aerospace everywhere you look. It is aerospace interests. Somehow, aerospace and NASA, that piece is where the JFK, the root of the assassination, comes from.
That is so interesting.
I know, we're into space, we're into Antarctica.
Well, and all the connections around it, too. Perfect next question.
I believe you.
Great. You've said on the record that Wernher von Braun actually predicted the rise of Elon Musk and SpaceX in the 21st century. When did this happen?
It's quite fascinating. And I want to put this out there that it's documented. It comes directly out of his book, Project Mars. So it's undeniable. The book was published in 1949, and it is a sci-fi novel, and it has all this technical information. And if you think about von Braun for a moment, we're taking him now from the Nazi rocket program where, they built the rockets, the V-2 rockets, to attack England and all that with slave labor. So he comes directly out of this SS setup. So we have to understand that about him before we bring him over through Project Paperclip and clean up his image and make him, the king of NASA, as it were. Now, when we get to von Braun, it's very interesting because through my work with Russell Targ, who's a physicist that developed the remote viewing program for the Central Intelligence Agency, he told me that when he met von Braun, he found out that von Braun's mother was psychic and that she would predict things and that she was well known as a psychic in the area, and people would come to her for predicting weather. They would come to her for predicting incidents, wars, whatever it happened to be. So von Braun instantly has an unusual footprint, as it were. And Targ said that von Braun came to him and said, I want you to develop an ESP testing device for NASA astronauts, because those we send into space need to have this high intuition on the psychic level. So that's what von Braun told Targ. And he did, in fact, develop the ESP testing device. Now, it's very interesting because when I went back and read Project Mars, and there's two of them, there's Project Mars and the Mars Project, two different books. But there's a prediction in there about who leads Mars in this expedition that happens. And when they get there, this expedition from Earth to Mars, when they get there, there's a whole civilization set up there. And the person who runs Mars is called Elon. So it's an undeniable, sort of strange and unusual prediction. But here's the other thing, which is that Elon himself is obsessed with going to Mars. So now we have an unusual kind of crisscross here about, and you're going to find this predictive quality when you get around the deep aerospace players. I'll have another example for you before we're done today. But there's something about going into that book. When I went into it further, I found many of the UFO cases that would come up, the same names, Colonel Halt, for example. There's a lot of similarities in that book. L. Ron Hubbard's name, one of the commanders, is Ron Hubbard. So we're getting to unusual territory when we're dealing with von Braun. But his comment about Musk is undeniable. And I'm going to have you read the quote because I brought it with me. And the quote, I actually put it up on the screen. This is from von Braun's Project Mars book.
All right.
So you take the first one and I'll take the second one.
Okay. The Martian government was directed by 10 men, the leader of whom was selected by universal suffrage for 5 years and entitled Elon. 2 houses of parliament enacted the laws to be administered by the Elon and his cabinet.
Werner von Braun, Project Mars. It's undeniable. So, is it a happenstance? Of course it could be. But then again, think about the level that we're talking on with these people. And also there's the strange psychic thing and the story that hangs out there in history about Targ saying, well, von Braun's mother was like this well-known psychic in Germany. I think we're in unusual territory immediately. And I think that also gets us into something about the mystical aspect around SpaceX and exteganography, which, after all, that's what we're here for. This is the exteganography series.
Well, so leading in, what is the secret ripple technology that was developed over 60 years ago, and why is it still classified today, like many other things?
Well, this is fascinating because this gets us back into Berkner again. When I was looking at the final speech of Lloyd Berkner with President Kennedy, I saw the ceremony aspect, and I got very into the details about the ceremony. Here's what was going to happen when President Kennedy landed at the Trade Mart. He was going to be greeted by Air Force One helicopter coming and taking a flag that had been flown over the White House, and it was going to be handed to President Kennedy, who was going to hand it to Berkner, and they were going to have a military command around them. So this is going to be a very special announcement as well, because he's handing over the flag of the White House to Berkner. So they're saying something international and of major importance is going on here. I've maintained the assassination of President Kennedy was related directly to his aerospace policy and his NASA policy. And when you get into those players in that aspect, you find Berkner sitting right in the middle of it, because it was Berkner who was encouraging him to go to the moon. And actually, in his favorite speech, we chose to go to the moon and do the other things, not because they're easy, but because they're hard. That's Berkner. It's Berkner wrote it and gave it to him and said, this is what you should say about it to get people on the same level. So Berkner, who'd been in Antarctica, Berkner, who'd been in charge of the UFO file on record through the Robertson panel in the 50s, he's instructing Kennedy about the space program and how we should proceed. Kennedy, in the background, is making major moves to share the information around advanced aerospace and the UFO file with the Soviet Union. A number of documents came out relating to this, and he wanted to do a joint moon mission, and he wanted to do a shared space program. So that gets rid of the space race, that gets rid of the Cold War and all the rest of it. So these people in the background looking at this in the State Department, in the ex-protect type groups that deal with secrecy around advanced technology, they're looking at Kennedy horrified because he wants to share this. Also, I think the paperclip aspect comes in here because you have Nazis who've been recruited into our technological program, and they just fought a war with the Russians where they killed 25 million Russians in a low estimate. And here is Kennedy saying, here's all the advanced stuff. I'm going to share it with our counterparts. And it's very interesting. If you look at the memo, Kennedy says, I'm going to do this so that we don't have nuclear incidents related to UFOs. So if a UFO goes over, let's say, a major nuclear base, they won't think it's an attack by the United States on Russia. So he has a very interesting, sound reason for doing this. But he is thinking we need to get together on this, and we need, as far as space goes, to do it as a joint moon mission. Now, Sergei Khrushchev, who is Khrushchev's son, confirmed on the record that he and that Khrushchev and Kennedy were getting together to do this. So Kennedy's in the middle of this program. Well, he finds out that there's a secondary program being developed in NASA, which I refer to as the Secret Space Program, SSP. And there's a lot of information about the SSP out there now. And not all of it is good, but what I can tell you for certain is the roots of it and how we can track it are through things that happened in the Kennedy-NASA era, because he said immediately, you can't have a public space program and a private one. It's one program. So he actually goes to NASA and says, I will give this program to the military if you don't make it a public program. I don't know what you're doing splitting the program. The name of the program is Blue Gemini, and this blue is the secret space program that you and I revealed last year. Now, the government came out officially, this is on record, and said last March, oh, yeah, we have the Blue Space Program. We don't think there was anything really dramatic about the Blue Space Program, but it was a secret program that we had, and we're announcing it here. You know, that's in direct response to us putting that out on the record, because obviously questions got asked in those circles. So Berkner in 1963 at the Trade Mart in Dallas, he's the person President Kennedy is going to meet, and although Kennedy's records, you know, and the speech were scrubbed, Berkner's notes have been unearthed. And what he said was the speech that they were going to give, one, was going to have international implications that were staggering. Now think about, you know, Berkner and Kennedy going to meet him and all the things that Kennedy was doing with space. My suggestion is that it was going to be related either to a joint moon mission with the Russians or related to the UFO file. You can get real UFO file disclosure, which the government has had at least 80 years, probably a lot longer. But there's also false disclosure, which accompanies a UFO threat narrative. That's the thing that's being pushed out there for congressional hearings. The Central Intelligence Agency, the NSA, the NRO, those secret groups have their own narrative. And what they want to do is create a UFO defense office in order to generate billions of dollars to fight an imaginary threat. Now, the UFO file's real, but the threat isn't. This is the nature of the problem. So they love the threat part, but they will never tell you the real story. You'll never get genuine UFO disclosure from the Central Intelligence Agency.
Circling back to NASA, is NASA involved in the UFO file cover-up and the development of the secret space program? And what was the role of a cult leader, Aleister Crowley, in its creation?
This is one of the most interesting things about NASA, and I think opens us up to the nature of it. Remember, I suggested that von Braun, you know, with his mother who was psychic, there's a mystical element involved. If we don't get the mystical psychic part when it comes to the aerospace piece, there's a whole piece there, which is their spirits of the air, their understanding of space. Even in the drive of SpaceX and Musk, the language is very mythical. It's Arthurian. So when we get around Crowley, it's very interesting because, of course, he was the great beast himself, and he put out all these major black magic books. He led the OTO. He was the most sinister figure you can possibly imagine. How does he have anything to do with aerospace and rockets and being in the heavens and all the rest? Well, it turns out that the person who started off our rocket program was Jack Parsons. And Parsons had a very interesting relationship where he started the branch in California of the first OTO. And the OTO is Aleister Crowley's occult organization. And there's all this incredible setup of, this warm relationship between Parsons and our friend Crowley. Now, Crowley has something in a book called Moonchild, a ritual. And it's the Babylon Rising ritual where you invoke these spirits and you basically bring in, it's kind of a Rosemary's Baby type thing. And Parsons was following along with Crowley, trying to do this with a very interesting companion, shall we say. So the ritual that they enacted took place in 1947 in the New Mexico desert. In the New Mexico desert in 1947, we get all the reports of the UFO file. Suddenly, everyone wants to talk about flying saucers and all the rest of it. There have been a number of people who've looked at the correlation of those dates and said, this is uncanny. Well, it's very interesting because Parsons, with all of his occult wisdom from Crowley, he became the foundational aspect of how NASA was created in the first place. And he dies in a strange explosion as well, somewhere along the line. It's just a fitting end for a cultist of that level. But I'll tell you, what's interesting to me about it is the influence that it had on NASA. And as a matter of fact, the JPL laboratory that they have is Jack Parsons' lab. That's JPL, which is, they changed the meaning of it to jet propulsion, but Jack Parsons has a crater on the moon named after him for all of his foundational work. He's the one. Well, if you go into Parsons' background, what was he doing in the 1920s and 30s, in addition to being so involved with Crowley and working on these rocket experiments, and really being an indispensable scientist in the middle of all this for Caltech? It's quite fascinating because what he was doing was having these intense long-distance calls back then with Werner von Braun in Germany. And in Germany, von Braun is back there, and he is, mystified by this whole process about how we can get into space. And he has all these mystical elements on his side, too. So we have a combination there of these figures, and it's a very, very deep occult tie that ties in Crowley and Parsons. But the person who comes out of that whole thing is not who you would expect, or maybe you would, but it's L. Ron Hubbard, who starts Scientology. He is close friends and a disciple of Parsons. And he's a prolific sci-fi writer. And after a while, he realizes, I'll turn Scientology into it. Well, Scientology has a heavy space ET component to it. When you get up to these higher and higher levels, you get information about space beings and things of this nature. Well, that all comes out of Parsons and Crowley. So you can see this wave from NASA, from Crowley, through Scientology. We're right in the middle of this gigantic mystery of how do all these things connect after all?
I have so many questions about that. Okay. Well, so...
that one, there's no question Crowley is the weirdest part of it.
Yeah, he just he took both and ran on out. Well, okay. So, do you think the latest UFO hearings with proposed intel whistleblowers in Congress will have any bearing on getting to the truth about the secret UAP programs?
No. I mean, you could say as a society it's always good. And it probably does me some good from the level of research that I do that more people start to hear about the topic. But the hearings in general, the UFO Congress, the congressional hearings dealing with this, all the witnesses that they have come forward, they're like, hey, he's a whistleblower, he's a whistleblower. When I go into their backgrounds just a little bit, they come directly out of the CIA. They never left it. They're not whistleblowers. And they keep alluding to secret programs, and I'll tell you more, I'm going to give you the secrets and UFO this and UFO that. They've changed the name of it to UAP, as we know. That's also part of their marketing campaign. So one of them is a character named Lou Elizondo. And Elizondo is a CIA counterintelligence agent. It's very simple. So he was part of Tom DeLonge's TTSA, and a radio station actually set up a debate podcast between myself and Tom DeLonge from, Blink-182. This guy was a rock star guy doing his UFO group. Well, they used somehow, when this came out in 2017, they were using Tom DeLonge to promote this idea of the UFO thing to the teen crowd or the younger set. But all the people around it were all, as I investigated his group, they were all CIA people and like really high ranking, directorate, top of the line, and intense experience. But without a doubt, they all were straight up CIA people. So I instantly said and, did a number of reports on it, and they got a lot of pushback, and they changed it around, and they pushed this guy Elizondo out. And then he lied to the public repeatedly about the various things that he was involved in. He said, I led a secret UFO program, and then I resigned because they wouldn't give the truth to the public. Well, he never resigned, and he never led the program. So those things are on the record now. And now when he goes out and he talks about it, because he has a new book that he's touting called Imminent, about UFO disclosure, he says, well, I didn't lead the program, but I was a part of it. So, little
Who
things.
said I resigned?
Yeah.
Who said that?
So you have to take them. What they have is they're prepping the narrative, and the narrative on their side is we have a UFO threat, and we need a UFO defense office and the intelligence agencies to fight it, and you have to trust us, And by the way, that whole origin story of humanity, we're going to give you the real thing on that. Hey, you're going to get to nirvana with the CIA giving you the talking points of your own history. I mean, the CIA, inveterate liars. I mean, the worst liars. And they've stonewalled the public. So this rebranding is quite something. So that's what you get in the congressional hearings. I've talked to some of the people involved in setting up the hearings. And I will tell you that they don't know much about the topic. And that's the sad part about it. They
Not
just
the
like
UAP. Oh no!
Here it comes.
If the breakaway civilization or expert tech group have been working for 80 years, a long time, on programs or re-engineering the X technology in the UFO file, what kind of technology do they have that we in the public don't know about?
That is the absolute question. This is the crux of the matter. So we'll take 80 years at least. All right, that brings us back to the 40s. It goes even further back. But in that period of time, they've been able to work on advanced technology completely outside of oversight from the public, although the public has funded what they've done. So these are the black budget programs, and their excuse all along the way is, well, it's national security, it's got a secrecy level, there's no oversight. When we get into a situation like this, the problem is those people become a tighter and tighter and tighter group. So that's where the expert secrecy comes from. That's where the breakaway aspect comes from, because they start to say, oh, we have all these advances. Why do we need to share that with the public? And that was the original problem. And it came about through the National Security Act in 1947, which basically established the Central Intelligence Agency. And it said, you aren't responsible for illegal activity. So there's a charter inside the CIA which gives them carte blanche to do things that aren't legal. This is the nature of part of the problem that we face as a country, that the National Security Act set up these intelligence groups. And it's funny because if you go back and you read Truman's comments about it, it's very interesting because he said, well, I got dragged along into doing this, but I didn't want to create an American Gestapo. And that's what they became. So by the time you get to the Kennedy administration, he says, I want to smash the CIA into 1,000 pieces and scatter it to the winds. So they're aware of an enemy there. The problem is that in the Central Intelligence Agency and inside of NASA, you have two big forces that are problematic. And both of them come from this aerospace paperclip aspect. So in that period of time, they said two things about Kennedy. He wants to share the UFO file, one. Two, he wants to be able to, smash the CIA. And sitting inside the CIA are the influence groups that came out of that post-Nazi era. So, Kennedy is on a mission to share the UFO file, and these groups are developing that secrecy in the background. In terms of what they have, this is very interesting because they've been talking about this Artemis program to go to the moon with. Well, we did our last manned moon mission in 1972. What have you been doing for 52 years? There's been nobody on the moon. We've had no manned space missions to Mars. It's funny because if you read the autobiography of Gordon Cooper as the Gemini astronaut who set up the Apollo flights, one of the earliest guys, the most clued in, he said, I was called in by Werner von Braun, and he said, you're going to lead the mission to Mars. You're it. Put it together. You're the commander. And he said, I got myself fit. I was working out this whole thing. He structured the Apollo missions. And he thought, well, I'm going to do this. And then at a certain point, someone came to him and said, don't talk about the Mars mission. Forget about it. Forget it was ever mentioned. That's it. And he was like, well, forget about this. I'm getting out of NASA. That's enough of that. And he ended up hearing in 1971 that in 1981, they were going to land on Mars, that they had the program set. And he said, well, what's going on here? And then it never happened. So there was a program there. Kennedy launched the program for NASA. They were supposed to go to the moon and then Mars. And then, basically create space infrastructure. The question is, what happened instead is that they created a secret space program with secret infrastructure. The public never got to see it, even though they funded it. That's why 50 years later, they can say, hey, we're going to the moon. That's why you have SpaceX, which is a privatized company after all. But all those things wouldn't have the infrastructure without the public being represented. The public funded NASA, which set this up in the background. But we never got a space program out of it. The privatized space program came up. So that's how they developed it, through a secret space program.
I'm so glad we funded that.
How do you get the money back? This could be a good question for the UFO hearings.
It is.
Give us the money back.
Ask it.
Where are the missing trillions?
Where are the monies? So, if X-Protect is the CIA aerospace group responsible for assassinations relating to the UFO file, what other figures in addition to JFK were eliminated for wanting to share the UFO file? Like, who else was at stake?
I'll tell you a key one. There's so many. I'm trying to think of who to choose. There's that many. Morris Jessup, I think, is one of the most important. Jessup is interesting because he's an astronomer, and he writes the case for the UFO. And he, in 1956 and 57, has kind of legitimized UFO research. And they are afraid of him being a scientific figure who's doing this. So he is very close friends with someone named J. Manson Valentine. And Manson Valentine will show up on the radar in a very important way in the 1960s, finding the Bimini Road. And he's associated with all this deep research off of Bimini, finding exotic technology, as we covered in our Hot Zone episode. Well, Manson Valentine's friend Jessup says, I have something very important to share with you. And I'm coming down to see you in Florida to do this. So, in a weird way, kind of like Admiral Byrd's son, he ends up missing.
Oh, I was just going to ask, did he make it?
So he shows up in a Florida park, and he's tied the hose. The carbon monoxide kills him in the car. So somewhere between driving down to see his friend, being all excited to do this, he ends up suicidal, apparently, and kills himself in his car. Jessup had it that not only was there a UFO question, but that there were already interactions going on between the governments and an off-world civilization. So he was already advanced on this side of things. but he also knew the technology edge, and I think that they regarded him as too much of a threat. There's a series of ex-protect situations that we get into where the people end up over and over again dead. There's just no way to get around that. And I think President Kennedy is kind of the most dramatic example. But ex-protect, they work, they're not just a lethal assassination group, but they have assassination as a major tool in the middle of all that. And, when you hear in this election people like RFK Jr., who his family has the background in the UFO file, President Kennedy, Robert Kennedy, and when you hear them saying, I want the JFK files released and I'm open to the UFO stuff, that sends shockwaves through those groups. There's no question about it.
Well, so what is the goal of Ex-Protect and the Breakaway Civilization? Like, do they hope to become an elite space-faring ruling group and just leave humanity behind using the secret space program? Or what's kind of the idea?
Yeah, that's a really good point. Look, here's what they're trying to do. I'll boil it down. The original Nazi program around their space program was control of things on the ground from space. It's pretty close if you think about it. So all the things that on one hand can have really fantastic possibilities like Starlink and the satellites and all the rest of it. At the same time, they have the ability then to track everything. So every piece of that, when it gets into tighter and tighter totalitarian hands, there's nowhere to hide from it. This is a very old program. And again, the groups that developed it were deeply involved with aerospace. And their goal was, very simply, control of things on the ground from space. So space stations, low Earth orbit, satellites, all these different things that are being developed in space. And the infrastructure that's been developed in space under secret conditions that we don't have access to. And I bring up the story very often about Gary McKinnon, who is the NASA hacker, and his story is undeniable. He hacks into NASA, and he finds two things that are crucial. One, all kinds of information about the UFO file, and two, an off-world officers list. So there's an entire off-world officers division that exists, the public, that you and I don't know anything about. McKinnon, they wanted to prosecute him in the United States, and there's a famous occasion where Obama, at the time, goes and he's standing there with Cameron, Prime Minister of the UK, and they ask him, they were like, what about Gary McKinnon? They're trying so hard to get him. What are you going to do to him? And he said, oh, you'll find out, you'll find out. We'll go through normal legal channels to get him, but we're going to get him. They don't, because there's something about him having Asperger's, and there's some medical loophole that allows him not to be prosecuted in America. If he were, it would have been a Julian Assange style situation. So, but the reason they wanted to prosecute him is simple. Yeah, he hacked into NASA for sure, but what did he reveal? The off-world officers list. Now, people will say, well, we would know about that if there were a program like that, for example. I always go to the National Reconnaissance Office. The NRO existed. It started in 1961. It was not revealed as a program until 1994. 33 years, operated billions of dollars every year. And basically what it did was it controlled satellite secrecy, reconnaissance. Nobody knew anything about it. So yes, what is the organization then that's operational now that is doing something related to the UFO file that we don't know anything about? We could wait 30 years.
When is it going to be 30 years for us?
Right. Is it going to be 30 years? That's the question.
Well, so if JFK made it to the Dallas Trade Mart to make his final speech with Lloyd Berkner on November 22nd, 1963, instead of being assassinated, what kind of world would we be living in now? What do you think?
Well, I think that Kennedy had a vision of freedom. And Kennedy also was coming from a place that the more open the society was, the more progressive it would be.
Transparency.
Transparency, exactly. But I think what happened along the way was he was too far ahead of his time. And it's interesting because Gorbachev, who gave a speech at the Texas School Book Depository, which when you think about it, is quite unusual, considering it's the spot from where Kennedy was assassinated. So I think he was sending a message there in that period of time, because Gorbachev has gone on the record about the UFO file extensively, including the fact that Reagan came to him and said in Reykjavik during one of their summits, if we have to deal with the UFOs, like if there's a battle, will you help us? Gorbachev went on the record with this New York Press Club. I have the clip. And he gives the whole story, and then he says, I'm sorry. Because the people in the room are stunned, and he realizes that he's dropped quite a bomb, but he's like, Reagan took it very seriously, and he said, if there's a UFO battle of some kind, are you going to help us? We're going to be joined together, Russia and the US, to fight this thing. Over and over again, when you get into this, you're going to find there's all this pressure around presidents not to get together with their Russian counterparts. So JFK and Khrushchev, he said, send all the State Department people away. I just want me and the translator and Khrushchev. They were upset at that. Reagan did the same thing. Gorbachev, I just want the translator. Putin and Trump did the same thing. I just want the translator. There was all this freaking out. Trump is a Trump puppet. He's a Putin puppet and all the rest of it. Whatever you think of that, it's part of that pattern, again, of them not wanting the president level to get together with the Russian side. Because in my opinion, the same groups that control the level of that technology do not want these leaders discussing the UFO file together on that senior level. So if President Kennedy had made it to the trademark, we would have had the space part on a totally different level, and we would be living in a totally different society. I don't think there's any doubt about it. The UFO file, it was early to reveal the UFO file, but if he was revealing it and giving briefings and having all that happening in the background then you would have seen some kind of disclosure in the 1960s. Think of us now. Now it's 2024. Here we are at the end, right in the middle here of this decade. And we're looking at a situation where all we're getting is the CIA disclosure and, the congressional intelligence community version of this thing. It's 60 years later. So I think this is the nature of the problem. And as these pieces open up about Antarctica, about paperclip, about advanced technology, and about managing these narratives, I think people will come to their own conclusion that we're living inside of someone else's walls of secrecy. And inside of that wall of secrecy, we'll never get anywhere as a culture. That's still a hardcore control culture. So what you need to do is smash the secrecy. The way to smash the secrecy is to get past the narratives and even the false historical narratives. In this case, JFK was killed by a lone gunman who just happened to get a lucky shot off, a magic bullet, all that stuff. And what's interesting is Oswald himself, if you think about him and his background with Bannister, the UFO file, and NASA, he represents that aerospace link directly in the assassination. And I think that puts us where we are today.
We're entitled to the truth, but will we find it?
That's a real good question. Yeah. I think the pressure is on heavily to obfuscate. But I think there are ways around it. And like we've pointed out tonight, some of the people even from that era are coming out and saying, yes, I was associated with that program. And as long as we get the legitimate voices, we'll be in great shape.
Well, so if the JFK assassination files that the CIA is blocking from the public after 61 years are finally released, let's hope, will Lloyd Berkner and the UFO files be in those secret records, do you think?
Yes, he's definitely in the records. And this is very interesting because when you have a figure like RFK Jr. looking for resolution around the JFK files, and you have presidential candidates pledging that they're going to open up the files as soon as they get into office, that sends shockwaves through that entire deep state operation. And so that's a big problem for them because on a family level, those people know. So if Robert Kennedy's son, you think about the knowledge level of Robert Kennedy working as the Attorney General of John F. Kennedy, he knows everything there is to know about the UFO file from that era. So I think that this is a major piece of it. If you get the JFK files open, the cascade effect that takes place after, especially relating to the UFO file, is dramatic. It is an avalanche. And so the question is, can they get it accomplished? Remember what Trump said to Napolitano: I couldn't release those records. You couldn't release those records. Well, can they be released?
And then what? Who else comes out? Who has other information to say?
Yes. I think that what we'll learn is that President Kennedy was assassinated over the UFO file. That's the problem.
Now, I just want to say this because it's in the heart of your work and it comes directly out of your Roswell and the Reich book. And I'm feeling this kind of Roswell, Huntsville, missing scientists overlap that is just, and it's something terribly missed when I've spoken to the mainstream, and there's a chance here. I'm speaking now with Vanity Fair. Maybe they're going to pick up on this, but I want them to get this and take these facts to the public, even in their own, commercial vein, whatever it happens to be. But if we go into Albuquerque and we see McCasland, General McCasland, Major General, going missing, Joseph, on his level, especially since through the WikiLeaks emails being leaked in 2016, and we know about this, on his level, isn't that a national security crisis, the fact that he's missing?
Absolutely, it's a national security crisis, and that's what grabs me about his disappearance in particular. It's not being handled that way. Yeah, it's just weird, So McCaslin disappearing, coming out of that airbase, I'm not buying it.
Joseph, what is the pattern? What is the pattern with them leaving behind their phones, leaving behind their glasses, leaving behind their wallets? And in some of these cases, there was a scientist up here who I think is also connected with this, named Jason Thomas, but he worked for Novartis. When he disappeared, he left his smartwatch in the mailbox for his wife to find. These are people, it seems like, are operating a protocol that says you're being called to this emergency meeting, leave all your possessions, leave all your electronic tracking devices behind at home.
It is a protocol. That was the first thing that occurred to me. It's a protocol to get rid of anything that might have the potential of containing any sort of tracking device or any sort of listening device on it. Just get rid of it. It's suggestive. It's highly suggestive that that's a first layer protocol, that at some point these people may have been taken to a place where their clothes were changed, their appearance changed. It may be it may be a multi-layered protocol thing that we're looking at. That's why this whole thing is so weird.
Yes.
It struck me that very same way. And the other thing that I find very weird about it, Daniel, is the kind of I don't know about you. In McCaslin's case alone, as you've pointed out, that's a national security issue. In fact, yes. I blogged about it and said basically the same thing.
Yeah.
So why is the reaction so tepid?
Yes.
It's that pot should be boiling.
No question.
And we don't see anything. There, at the minimum, you would think that there would be an occasional alert on television or radio. Have you seen this man? If so, here's the description, call such and such a number. We're not seeing any of that.
No. And he disappeared in this very tiny corridor of time between when his wife goes, she's going to the doctor or somewhere, and she comes back within an hour. In that time, a workman at the house has seen him. So he just, in this little window, he disappears entirely, and they can't trace him at all. Nothing. That's very coordinated, it seems.
That's coordinated, and it suggests there may be another protocol in play that these people might be receiving some kind of signal.
Right.
It's time to ditch, bail out now. Meet at such and such. There's so much about this that's fishy.
No question. Well, Joseph, in your research, you examined this whole thing about the story of the memory medal at Roswell.
Yes.
And I have to tell you, the memory medal has been a fascination of mine for many, many years. I tracked down almost every statement of anyone who touched it, felt it, to see what it did, Marcel's descriptions, and then its accompanying I-beams with the hieroglyphs and all the rest of it. I thought it was maybe the real heart of the Roswell case, in fact, at the end of the day. And this whole piece about nitinol, which was something that was being builded up and wasn't really doing a whole lot in the 1940s, and then suddenly gets supercharged during this period of 1947 to 1949. And the company that was working, a scientific institute that was working with the government at the time, was Battelle Institute. And at Wright-Patterson, when they get the Roswell material, to make a long story short, the really complicated stuff they send off to Battelle. And Battelle, one of these researchers who kind of kept track on Battelle, and he did a series of books back in 2008, 2009, and he said the memory medal files are missing. There's actually a huge article in the Miami Herald about this, which I have. And this whole thing goes into how the reports for how nitinol went from 1947 to 1949 completely disappeared from Battelle's records. And their response was, well, we're a nonprofit organization. We don't have to keep those types of records, which is very unusual kind of, deep state block, national security block on that. But we do see nitinol becomes incredibly used in, phenomenal properties for medical use, phenomenal properties for space use. This thing is in the warp and woof of all the technological achievements that follow. Now, it's very interesting because Monica Reza, who was McCaslin's assistant and worked with him for 5 years at that AFRL lab at Wright-Patterson, redeveloping this Roswell material. She is in Angeles Forest, 60-year-old woman, very fit, and she's hiking up there. The team that she's with, 3 people, they're looking back at her. They look up, she smiles, she waves. They look back, she's gone, like that. There's no trace of her. The only thing they find is her beanie. They do, searches with dogs. The scent ends right there, and that's it. There's nothing else in relation to her. Fascinating in her background is that she holds this patent for Mondeloy, excuse me. And Mondeloy is very interesting because it's the same nickel alloy like nitinol and has a very interesting property in common with the Roswell memory metal, which is it's incredibly heat resistant, just like all of the early descriptions of that metal. Joseph, with your own examination of the nitinol issue from your book, The Roswell and the Reich, try to kind of give us some idea of how all these things fall into place. And is it true that her holding of a private patent of something that was developed inside of a government experiment may have been part of the protocol for taking her out?
It may have been part of the protocol for taking her out. It may have been part of the protocols of a highly compartmentalized system of research too.
Right.
Because there's no better way to assert compartmentalization than to assert proprietary rights over something. The nitinol thing, let's go back to why I talked about that in Roswell and the Reich, and why I talked about the hieroglyphs on the I-beam bar that Jesse Marcel allegedly saw, because I reproduce a very different interpretation of that, and it's not the standard Roswell AT craft with beady skinned bodies and all that nonsense that's associated with the Roswell story. I'll be blunt and tell people I think what crashed there was Nazi, okay? And that the Air Force covered it up with the ET story and the weather balloon as two extremes, because they could not admit that someone is flying Nazi technology with impunity over the skies of New Mexico 2 years after the war ends. That would have been too much.
Right.
So much better to talk about ETs flying around in things that are not reproducing any speeds, observable speeds, to indicate that they come from another planet. So in other words, if you stick with the science and stick with the data, it's not extraterrestrial, folks, period. It's not even interplanetary in this solar system. It's not fast enough, folks. So again, I'm trying to reverse engineer the details of the story. One of the details is this memory metal, which Marcel and others found in the debris field at Roswell, which you crumpled up and it would reassume its shape. And this detail for years, I know because I lived with the Roswell story for years, was one of those details. Well, that proves it could not have been human. It was extraterrestrial because memory metals did not exist in 1947.
Right.
Bull roar, they didn't. In the book, I point out that the first memory metal recorded was actually recorded by a Swedish chemicals and metallurgy engineer in the 1930s. Memory metal in Sweden. Now, let that stop and sink in. It's recorded and announced at a time after the Nazis come to power in the next door neighbor to Germany. Would they take an interest in something like that? Of course they would. If you're bent on world domination, you're going to take an interest in anything you think might help that cause. So memory metal might be one of those things.
Exactly.
So that's my first problem with the nitinol explanation. Memory metal was around and a discovered idea long before Roswell. You have from the 1930s up to the appearance of nitinol, you have a period of over a decade for research on that type of subject to be taking place. Would nickel conceivably have been involved? Very possibly. So what I'm suggesting is press the nitinol story back from the 1960s and even back from the 1940s back into the 1930s, when all of this stuff is beginning to percolate in this flesh pot of speculation called Nazi Germany. Now, the hieroglyphs on the I-beam, I point out, if you look at the hieroglyphs that Jesse Marcel draws under hypnosis,
the Sun Junior,
the Sun Junior, that he draws under hypnosis, they're very interesting. They're very intriguing because they don't look like characters; they look like diagrams.
Yes,
and the way I interpret them is they are actually possibly resembling the diagrams of quantum states of the hydrogen atom.
Oh, right.
So in other words, even there, we're what I'm trying to do is get out of this mentality that, well, it's an ET crash and it's so far beyond our science, we don't need to do any effort to try and reverse engineer what the details are and why they might be there.
Yeah.
It's the same approach to the Bell. So, my problem with Roswell is okay, if it was ET, if it was genuinely extraterrestrial, and if you genuinely suspected that it was, why would the Air Force then bring in a bunch of Nazis to look at it? Are we going to be that security stupid?
No. Right. Well, probably one of the fascinating things is you've got a weird history with Roswell. There's no question about it.
It's very
because
weird.
You've got Guggenheim funding, Lindbergh and Goddard. And Lindbergh sets it up for Guggenheim to set up Goddard there in 1931. And, hey, set off rockets left and right, Parsons is so interested in Goddard's work. He's creating these incredible scientific equations for rocketry. And he's in touch with von Braun. I mean, it's a lot of weird people associated around Roswell. But the fact that Goddard is setting off...
Don't forget Senator Joseph McCarthy.
Oh, yeah, right.
He's definitely connected to the story.
Yeah, no question.
In his own inimitable way.
And that brings Roy Cohn on the scene.
Well, that brings Roy Cohn on the scene. And when we drag Roy Cohn onto the scene, we're dragging Donald Trump onto the scene.
Exactly. And you were the one who proved that McCarthy and Cohn in the Army hearings were bringing up Roswell.
They were talking about Roswell and the UFO, and that's why they shut him down.
Yes.
It's not the story we have been told at all. And if that sounds crazy, folks, I'm also the only guy that went out and got the transcripts from those hearings and can take you through, as I do in the book, line by line as to what they're saying and why they're saying. And it's clear they are touching on the UFO topic and asking about Roswell and certain dates in July of 1947.
It's amazing. And it seems it seems like Cohn in his questioning is blackmailing the guy on the spot.
Oh, Cohn is, and Cohn resort to such tactics? No.
He's basically like, I'm going to expose your whole UFO program if you don't go my way. Well, this is the guy
that sent the Rosenbergs to the electric chair. So yeah, he's not above.
Yeah,
he's not above.
Unbelievable.
Literally underhandedness.
It's amazing, and the characters, how they recur through history. I was finding this whole thing about Earl Warren running as Tom Dewey's VP. And being involved in that Rosenberg case, and then all the people around the Rosenberg case reemerge in the Kennedy case. Yeah. It's like 13 years later. Very strange.
It's very strange, and I'm of the Franklin Roosevelt school here. One of the few occasions I agree with the man. If it happens in politics, it's not a coincidence.
All right, it was planned.
It was planned.
The final thing on the Reza Nitinol Mondaloy combination is one of the aspects of that memory metal was, according to Marcel, no matter what you did to it heat wise, nothing could change its condition, composition. That seems to be the foundation of the patent for Monica Reza.
Yeah.
And her patent for Mondaloy. This is the interesting thing. Now, her partner in that patent passed away of cancer in 2014. this other woman, Dallas Hardwick, who was also a scientist. And here's what's interesting to me. There was an announcement that they have some problems now with the Mondeloy patent because they have industrial issues because the founder is dead or missing. So there's something now on the production side that says we might not be able to use the Mondeloy because the patent required the person who had developed it in the first place in order for it to work. Joseph, what is going on there?
Well, there's two answers, and probably no one's going to like either one of them. The first answer is it's pseudoscience. That's the usual response that we get whenever we encounter claims that some sort of exotic technology only can work in the presence of the person who invented the exotic technology. Okay, think John Worrell Keeley in the 19th century. Any number of other people. Royal Raymond Rife and his microscope.
Yes, I'm a big fan of Keeley.
Well, yeah, there's all sorts of examples of these types of phenomena where an exotic technology has been claimed and then denounced because it has only been able to be operable or operate correctly in the presence of its inventor. That's the first answer. The second answer is one that a diehard materialist science, a Richard Dawkins or a Charles Darwin or a standard sort of physicist are not going to like. And that's something that Lieutenant Colonel Tom Bearden, who was analyzing this type of phenomena in a paper that he wrote many years ago. I forget what the name of the paper was. But he called it a local structured potential. And what he means by that is, again, going back to my illustration earlier about structures of zero-summed vectors, different structures of zero-sum vectors. Each different structure is a local structured potential because it's local. Right. It's at a particular point. It has a particular internal structure that to external analysis doesn't appear to do anything. So you've got some sort of, I think, and what he argues in his little paper is you've got some sort of very minute bioelectric field that imprints itself on these types of devices for whatever reason that we're not really sure of, but somehow imprints itself, and therefore only functions efficiently when it's in the presence of and has that local structured potential activating. So who knows?
Interesting.
Yeah, it's a very weird theory, but in fact, I like it because it means that far from approaching things from a standpoint of 19th century materialistic Victorian science, we denounce all of this stuff as fraud and mountebank. Right. Well, it keeps happening over and over again, and it simply doesn't make sense to me that all of these cases are fraudulent and that 100% never happened. Something is going on, and it bears investigating.
Wow.
And that is as good a hypothesis as any, as a standpoint from which to start, perhaps, to elaborate experiments to test it. As far as I know, Daniel, no one has taken Bearden's paper as a point of departure to design any experiments like that, other than our good friends, the Russians.
Oh, right. Yes. Wow.
They did. The Russians, listen, during the 60s, 70s, and early 80s, the Russians during the Cold War were doing all sorts of biometric, bioelectric, psychotronic,
signature, yes,
research of all sorts of stuff. And a lot of it was, it's kind of like the Nazi on era. A lot of it was just horse pucky and nonsense,
right, yeah.
And a lot of it wasn't,
Yeah.
And it's the stuff that wasn't that's really kind of eye catching.
Wow.
The Russians.
Well, let me ask you this.
Yeah.
And that, that's a good tapestry to say, where does it fit in here or there? I'll tell you what occurred to me, and I want to know your input on this. Is it possible she's operating with McCaslin now? Remember, she's a top NASA engineer.
Right.
She's operating with McCaslin, who's a major general who's in charge of all the Roswell material after the fact. This is many decades after, but they're still working through that stuff.
Sure.
And figuring out its uses and developing, all kinds of different scientific innovations as a result.
Mm-hmm.
So they're there in that lab, and then somewhere in the midst of that research, she patents it.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm thinking, because they've left the UFO file between the government and between the defense contractors, did she step out and did she say, well, I developed it in this program, but they can't patent it because of the nature of the program. Neither can the government. I can patent it and I'm going to. And they use the patent and they demonstrate that the patent works. Now, here's the weird thing. It gets in use. It's actually in use and plugged in at that point. Now, her relationship to the UFO file through the Wright-Patterson lab and all the rest of it, that's her background. So she goes on this hiking trip. She gets disappeared. Later, 6 months later, McCaslin's disappeared. But when she's gone, and now they put out statements saying, well, the future of Mondaloy, because we have a production problem, because the founder no longer exists, we're not able to do this. Do you think that it's her expertise on the UFO file that they didn't want that part released anyway? And so therefore they don't have somebody else who has access to the UFO file. So on the company side, and by the way, that patent has moved 22 different times into different hands. Different aspects have picked it up. The group that has it now says, we're not sure we're going to be able to do it because Monica's gone. So do you think it's because she had access to the UFO file and they don't?
It could be. It could be, it could be that there's something in the process of making or confecting the alloy that she deliberately left out. That could be too. A bit of a dead man insurance switch, so to speak. In reverse.
Right. Yes.
It could be my local structured potential, or not my local structured potential idea, but Tom Bearden's local structured potential idea. It could be any number of those things. I wouldn't be surprised that someone in her position would take out a patent and not disclose the full art, disclose enough of it to ensure that whatever she was holding back could be verifiably part of the original patent. So in other words, it's the key. It's like the key component in a jigsaw puzzle. That piece that reveals the meaning of the whole rest of the puzzle that's been assembled, but that one piece is missing. It could be something like that. And it's the right piece from the right puzzle maker because it's the only piece that fits.
Yes.
It's that sort of thing. Possibly. It would be difficult, I would think, to be a materials engineer and do something like that. It would require a great deal of expertise.
That was the part when it said we no longer can produce it. I said, the whole point of the exercise of removing her was to take it out of circulation.
Yeah, it could be. If that's the case, then it implies that perhaps she is the key to unlocking the rest of the pattern. of the missing scientists, that they might have been taken out of the picture by whatever means to prevent a technology from coming into actualization or popular dissemination. That's possible.
Oh, wow. Wow. Incredible. Joseph, phenomenal. And of course, as we're flooded with these headlines and things around the UFO file, around the missing scientists, in your work in the background, we can see so many of the linkages of the different groups that are involved there. I know you're working on a new book. I just want to take that moment to ask you if you if you have any kind of timeline for it here.
I just got a couple of books in the mail yesterday that I have been waiting for that were necessary to flesh out one of the chapters. I don't have any timeline as yet. I'm hoping before the end of the year to get it done and out. But this is a difficult one because I'm telling the middle of the story. And it's the middle of the story that is really problematical because there's been a lot written about the middle of the story, but not by people like us.
Right, yeah.
That are interested in the weird areas. So, everything I'm reading is by all these bland, Wall Street Journal type people that are into their graphs and their charts and their, average typical explanations of things. And they I do have some of the book written, and I have right at the beginning of it, I have an epigraph that if it doesn't make you stop and think, you're just not paying attention.
Right.
Sorry, guys at the WSJ, you missed this one.
Can we say that there's something about television in it?
Yeah, you could say that. Yeah, I think you could say that. Yeah. Yeah, you could easily say that.
I'm excited for this one. I can't wait. Joseph, it's great.
The trouble is I've got to fit all this together, and I don't even yet know that it's going to be possible. So this may not end up being a book. And if it does end up being a book, it may be the most disjointed gyro gear loose contraption that's ever been unleashed on the public.
I can feel the enthusiasm that you have.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Bubbling over.
Now, Joseph, in part one, you alluded to Einstein's secret UFO physics. Can you elaborate on that here?
Here we go. All right.
Absolute differential calculus.
This is the textbook on tensor calculus. All right.
Oh.
This is the stuff Albert Einstein uses for general relativity. And look at the name down here. I'll hold it up. Tullio Levi-Civita. Okay. The Italian mathematician that basically invents tensor calculus. Okay. Mm-hmm. So it's his baby.
What year? Maybe roughly.
Oh, this book was, hang on.
40s?
Oh, no, earlier than that. 26.
1926.
1926.
Wow.
Now, when you read this, you read chapter titles like hypersurfaces in Euclidean space, congruences, and then conditions of normality, and then the last several chapters of this book are dealing with relativity theory in one way or another. All right.
Oh, wow.
Now, what people don't realize is that when Einstein published general relativity at 1916, when he published it, Levi-Civita was alive, and he went through Einstein's math.
And what did he say?
He said it's garbage.
Wow.
he basically
published.
Yeah. Well, that's not the end of the story. He basically wrote a 9-page, I think about 9-10 page article in which he said that Einstein's gravitational tensor was mathematical gobbledygook. It was nonsense.
Wow.
It made no sense. Is what he was saying.
Incredible.
Well, that, of course, piqued the great Albert's ire, and the great Albert started a correspondence with Professor Levi Civita that went on for quite some time. And I'm thinking, okay, let's put all these clues together. Missing scientists, Ben Rich, Eric Weinstein. You know, what do we got?
The early fundamentals that they came out with publicly were flawed, maybe intentionally. Yeah.
Maybe maybe intentionally. So I'm thinking, okay, if there's an error in the equations, did Ben Rich sit down and plow through this little known discussion between Einstein and Levi Civita? Maybe that's it. I don't know.
Interesting. Okay.
But what I'm getting at here is everything that I'm telling you about this little known dispute in science is about what? It's about gravity. General relativity is basically Einstein's geometrization of the theory of gravity. That's basically what it is. Now let's go to another point, and that is the Mexican physicist Miguel Alcubierre. Because back in the 1990s, Miguel Alcubierre published that now very famous paper on warp drive.
Right.
Okay. And, you know, people keep finding this and sending it to me as if it's news. Well, yeah, it's been around for quite a while.
Yeah.
The problem is, if you read the paper, the mass energy conversion factor that Alcubierre's paper kind of indicates is necessary to achieve that kind of warp capability would be the mass energy equivalent of the planet Jupiter.
Oh my God.
Yeah, so it's way outside the realm of human capability. All right. However, again, here's a little clue, a little indicator that something is going on in the physics world that may hint that they have actually developed a physics that Eric Weinstein and me and you don't know about. Because, pardon me, in NASA, there is another scientist by the name of Dr. Harold Sonny White. And Dr. White reworked the metric aspect, the measurement aspect of Alcubierre's paper, and said, no, the mass energy conversion factor isn't nearly that big. And when he worked it out with the new figures, so to speak, he came up with a figure that was within the potential ability of humanity to accomplish if one wanted to project forward into history. So after Harold Sonny White published this finding, DARPA, the Diabolically Apocalyptic Research Projects Agency, as we like to call it on my website, thanks to one of the suggestions.
That's very good. Yeah.
Well, one of my website members came up with a fellow by the name of Liquid 911 was his handle in the chat room. So I said, I'm taking that, by the way. And he said, it's yours. If
Bezos' grandfather was involved in, founding them and making them great, then something is amiss.
Yeah,
with them right
bingo.
Off the bat.
Yeah, bingo. So anyway, the metric was small enough that DARPA, after Harold White came out with that finding, DARPA said, we established a goal, a kind of John F. Kennedy, we want to land somebody on the moon and return them safely to Earth before this decade is out. Okay. Mm-hmm. Well, DARPA came out with its own kind of Kennedy-esque goal that people keep forgetting. We want, and this was about 10 to 15 years ago, we want the United States to be warp capable in a century.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Okay. Again, what that says is there is something fundamentally in error in the standard physics that we are being taught in school. There's a problem. There is a flaw. And the flaw lies, in my opinion, probably in the way that relativity has been appropriated by the theoretical physics community. That's just my guess. Now, you have to understand something. Most of the theoretical physics papers between the wars were often published in journals like Mathematischen Annalen in Germany. So, in other words, if you go to those German interwar journals, you're going to find papers by E.T. Whittaker, a marvelous paper that he wrote called On the Partial Differential Equations of Mathematical Physics, a real snooze fest if you employ just the title. But I guarantee you can read that whole paper and then you get the right hook right at the end of that paper. And you don't need to be a mathematician to understand the significance of the final paragraph in that paper. Because what he's saying is gravity can be subject to a kind of harmonic analysis. Okay. That's an O.
Yeah.
But anyway, you get all
way ahead of his time.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. You get all of these very interesting papers being published in the interwar period, including several papers by Albert Einstein on various approaches to unified field theories. I talk about these in some of my books. One of them being distant parallelism, another one being torsion-based unified field theories. You've got Kaluza-Klein, and on we go. Well, the interesting thing about many of these theories is precisely the fact that they do have some sort of connection to torsion in some form or fashion. And then on top of it all, we've got Walter Gerlach, the Nazi physicist that's actually in charge of not only their atom bomb project, but he's also kind of the guy that's ultimately sitting on top of the Bell project. Why? Well, Walter Gerlach is not a nuclear physicist in the standard sense at all. His real interest prior to the war and during the war is gravity and rotating systems. Okay, this is why he's involved, with the Stern-Gerlach experiment, trying to figure out the spin moment of particles before the war. So in other words, this is his whole thing. Well, the other thing that Gerlach is doing, by the way, is he's in correspondence with the Austrian physicist Lense and Thirring, Thirring. And the three of them are trying to figure out, well, what would happen if we put a satellite up in space in orbit around the Earth? Okay, this is fun for these guys to sit around and do this sort of stuff.
Would you say maybe 1930s?
Oh yeah, this is 20s and 30s. They're doing this. Well, there's no satellites up there yet.
Yeah.
Okay. And what they conclude is, and this I find very interesting, they conclude that, well, satellites will be subject to what relativistic theory would call frame dragging. Okay. In other words, the satellite would begin to drag in the rotating system of the Earth and fall behind where theoretically it should be. So in other words, there's a drag effect in any rotating system. Now, what that means is you have to constantly be figuring where the satellite actually is according to this effect. In other words, frame dragging is the relativistic way of saying ether drag.
Oh,
you follow me here? So we're back to that whole Michelson-Morley
19th century
bingo.
That got completely taken out of the regular educational run, but it was huge. Let's say before the turn of the century.
Well, what happens is Michelson and Moore, and this is part of the story I've mentioned in these interviews with you and many other places 4. Michelson and Morley construct an interferometer in which they're going to split a beam of light and then re-interfere the beams on, and what they're trying to do is detect the ether wind as it's blowing past the Earth. Okay. And their reasoning is, as it's blowing past the Earth, it's going to be like the locomotive horn that's blowing its whistle as it approaches you and then recedes. As it approaches you, the waves compact. As it recedes, the waves stretch and the tone falls. Well, a similar thing, they reason, should be happening to the beam of light. As it's approaching you, the light should be higher frequency, in other words, towards the blue end of the spectrum. As it recedes and experiences the ether drag, it should fall towards the red and infrared end of the spectrum. Okay, that's what they were trying to find. They were trying to detect the ether by splitting a beam of light. Unfortunately, when they performed their experiment, nothing happened.
Oh.
Okay. So that's when you get Henrik Lorentz, the Dutch physicist, the Lorentz transforms, which are used by Einstein in special relativity to explain why we're not getting any ether drag. And that's when you come up with the idea that the speed of light is an absolute constant across all frames of reference. That's where it starts. Okay. Now, the problem is that keeps being forgotten in physics is that there was in 1913, after special relativity had come out and been basically stamped with the stamp of approval by everybody, there was a French physicist by the name of Georges Sagnac, Sagnac. All right. And Monsieur Sagnac says, wait a minute, not so fast. You stupid Americans, meaning Michelson and Morley, you stupid Americans designed your interferometer in the wrong way, and therefore you weren't going to detect anything.
Oh.
Every system, here's his reasoning, every system that we know of in the known universe is a rotating system. From the very small to the very large. This is kind of a constant. So your interferometer needs to be in a rotating system. Split the beam of light in a rotating system and have the beam of light that's going in the direction of the rotation interfered back together with the beam of light that's going against the rotation and see what happens. Well, he performed his own experiment, and voila, he detected an interferometry pattern, and that meant that there was an effect, a frame dragging ether effect by dint of the rotating system. That's Lenza, Turing, and Gerlach.
Amazing.
Yeah. So in other words, even these simple physics facts, they're in the public record. Okay, I'm not telling you anything that's not there in the public record, but what I am saying is some of these things go against the public narrative physics that we have been taught to believe. Okay, and they
could you say that ether,
they all have to do with rotation and gravity and spin, Nazi Bell, plasma, rotating plasma, and so on and so all of this is connected conceptually. Anyway, I didn't mean
rotating plasma, right? And that's how they got the Bell.
That's how they got the Bell
design. Yeah. It's interesting also because ether occupies this interesting place, sort of, would you say, between alchemy and 20th century science, because it's right there leveling off between the two. And it's almost like a mystery school knowledge coming to the fore, and then it gets zapped off.
It gets shuffled off the stage. Yes.
It reminds me of hypnosis when it was originally coming out in Charcot and, drawing from Mesmer and all this incredible rich thing about the subconscious. And then it becomes limited down to this psychological tool to re-experience a trauma or whatever, and completely eliminates all the uses for it. Yeah. But the ether comes in there as well, because you can see all those groups at the time, like Theosophy, Anthroposophy, and all those mystery groups. They were very excited about ether, and this is going to revolutionize the way that humanity thinks about the universe and all the rest.
The whole 19th century, all the way up to and here's the key point here, and including the British physicist E.T. Whittaker, a crucial name in all of this, because let me illustrate your point with this anecdote, and I think you'll latch on to it right away what I'm saying. E.T. Whittaker published a textbook, a history of the ether. That's what the book was called, A History of the Ether, by a world-renowned mathematical physicist. Whether you agreed with him or not, everybody knows who he is, okay? He published his History of the Ether. And the original version that he published was different than the version he was made to release later.
Oh, yeah.
The post-relativistic, scrubbed up and cleaned up version of his History of the Ether. Please note what I just said. Because he himself was one of these people who had some fundamental difficulties with the anointing of general relativity and Albert Einstein as the physicist for all time. Okay.
Right. Yeah.
And let's remember that when Arthur Eddington did that anointing of Albert Einstein, Eddington had to fudge the numbers of that eclipse that supposedly proved general relativity. Because the numbers that general relativity predicted and the numbers that they were getting out of the eclipse were two different things.
Interesting.
So in other words, we're going to prove the concept even though the numbers that were predicted are wrong.
Right. Wow.
Oh, that's science, folks. Follow the science.
But you feel that there's a group who continue to operate with the actual physics.
Yes, I do.
While on the surface, there was all of these scientific bantering and all the rest of it, but there's a group inside there. They're using the main thing, and they're running down the football field with it.
Yeah, let's go back to Eric Weinstein. He's attempting to find a higher order mathematics. We literally do not have in the public realm the mathematics capable of dealing with these UFO related things, sudden inertial turns of direction at tremendous speed and so on and so forth.
Right.
Which would seem to indicate that you've got some way of damping inertia. What is it? And does it come out of some particle of inertia from quantum mechanics? So there's your link to quantum mechanics. On and on it goes. So you've got this quest for a higher mathematics. Well, let's look at the history for a minute. We know for an absolute fact that James Clerk Maxwell, when he published his theory of magnetism and electricity, basically unifying electricity and magnetism into electromagnetism, when he published that first theoretical unification in physics, he used a form of mathematics that we do not use today called quaternion geometry. And as a result of his use of that different mathematical language, he came up with a very different version of electromagnetic theory than is taught today publicly, because Oliver Heaviside got a hold of Maxwell's equations and took them out of that mathematical language that Maxwell had couched them in and put them and refashioned them into partial differential equations that you learn today. Okay, so you're not even using the same kind of mathematics when you're learning Maxwell's theory. This is my point. And as a result of using Heaviside's notation, you're missing some of the major points that Maxwell made in his version of the theory, such as scalar potential. Okay?
What is the name of that geometry again?
Quaternion geometry.
And where are they getting the quaternion?
Here. I'll show you.
Yes.
Okay, there's a little book on quaternion geometry.
Interesting.
It's a little Dover book. The author's name is Simon Altman.
Okay.
But the inventor of quaternion geometry is an Irish mathematician by the name of Rowan Hamilton. All right. So when you see physicists talking about Hamiltonians, they're referring to Rowan Hamilton. The interesting thing about what Maxwell was saying is there is an infolded pure magnitude of force. You know, in my book, The SS Brotherhood of the Bell, I have those diagrams of what happens when you get rid of the scalar potential and use a zero-sum vector as replacement for the scalar potential, because you can have three vectors all converging on a point that sum to zero. In other words, the zero vector means it doesn't move from this point to that point. That's what it means. Okay. But the problem is I can have 5 vectors converging at a point that sums to zero. And if I'm taught that all zero vectors are replaceable, then the 3-sum zero vector is going to be replaced and equivalent to, mathematically, the 5 zero vector. Follow me? But the internal structure of each zero vector is different. And this is what Maxwell meant by scalar potential. The enfolded structure, the enfolded potential, has its own internal structure, and it is not simply mathematically equivalent to a different structure that sums to zero. Follow me?
Yeah.
So in other words, because the mathematical language was changed, a major portion of Maxwell's theory became overlooked. At least that's the way we've been taught to interpret it. But I don't think that this is the case. I think that research continued. So I think what you have eventually is you've got all these indicators of suppressed mathematics, suppressed mathematical models, attempts to resolve the resulting confusion of the suppression by invention of higher dimensional theories to account for it, you know, Kaluza, Klein, and on and on. So in other words, what I'm telling you is the last 200 years of theoretical physics looks to me and to many people as if it has been deliberately diverted into a dead end.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
There is a mathematics somewhere that can handle all of this. Maxwell was using part of it. I don't think he was using all of it, because I don't think it had been all invented yet. But at least Hamilton was on the right track when he came up with quaternion geometry and so on. So you get a very different kind of mathematics than what we are taught in physics today. And if all you know is a truncated version of the mathematics, then the mathematical models you're using in your physics is also going to be truncated. And you're going to create problems, you know, like how do you reconcile general relativity and the standard theory of quantum mechanics? How do you create a geometry to reconcile the two?
Right.
Well,
it's interesting. Let's take a figure like Thomas Townsend Brown, for example.
Okay.
Byfield-Brown effect,
right?
UFOs, anti-gravity, acoustic fan, all the incredible things he was part of. Now, he's the kind of a figure that, say, like the U.S. government could say, we want to take you, you're going to work on the actual physics. By the way, this is stuff up here we put out publicly. That's for everybody else. You're working in these black projects. And so he's somebody who maybe is an interface type figure for this.
Yes, absolutely. I think so. I think this gets us into Huntsville and back to the Nazis and what's going on, because there is a place at which I disagree to a certain extent with Professor Weinstein, and that is that if you look at the history of ufology, of these exotic technologies that, whether they're true or not, they're there in the record. And this is the problem, that we have not really come up with good explanations of why these things are in the record. I attempted to do that, with my attempts to reverse engineer what I think may have been going on in those Germans' heads with this weird Bell project. Well, let's do the same thing with Thomas Thompson Brown. He's playing around with his gravitators, and he's concluding that he's accessing some sort of coupling effect between electromagnetism and gravity. And he concludes that fairly early on in his career, but he provides the proof of concept for it, because some people say, oh, you're just creating an ion wind. That's all you're doing. Okay. So in other words, you're getting all these effects through an ion wind. Well, here's the bad news for the ion wind people. The government of France in the early 1950s invited Townsend Brown to France and said, we can make the equipment available to you to test your gravitators in vacuum.
Oh.
And prove once and for all whether or not they were achieving these levitating effects through ion wind.
Oh, wow. Okay. Right in the lab, basically.
Right in the lab. And he went over and performed his experiments, and sure enough, they're still doing the same dang thing.
Oh, wow.
Under conditions that it was impossible to create an ion wind. Okay.
Wow.
So in other words, poof. And then at that point, what people forget is the U.S. Navy all of a sudden is very interested in him again.
Yes.
Calls him back to this country. And by the way, on the way back, I think it's probably as a result of his experiments in France, Townsend Brown comes up with his idea of Project Winter Haven. I don't know if you've ever read his document.
Yes.
Oh, yeah. That's quite a read.
Incredible.
It is an incredible read, because one of the things he's arguing is we can use this technology to detect atomic explosions.
Wow. Yeah.
In space.
Yes.
Okay.
Wow. Who's setting off atomic explosions in space?
In space.
Little looking into the future there, or the past.
Or the past, yes, exactly. So yeah, Townsend Brown is one of these characters that you really, you see him flitting across the sky, and he's like a meteor that burns out. You don't know what to make of him. Well, add to that Tesla.
Yeah.
You've got Tesla's own, and what people don't understand about Tesla is that Tesla had
he's an interface character too.
Oh, he's definitely an interface character. Why? Yeah. Because on the one hand, he's looking forward to the whole world of quantum mechanics in the late 19th century, because he thinks of particles as, here it comes, little tiny vortices in the ether. In other words, they're what? They're systems of rotation.
Yeah.
In the ether. That's all they are. So in other words, for Tesla, particles are what? They're little packets of mathematical information, kind of like quantum mechanics.
Wow. Yeah, that is something.
Yeah. So by the time you get up to the Germans, in the Nazi era, you've got all of this fertile, fermented ground that's just waiting to be plowed over and planted. And along comes Hans Kammler. Go to it, boys. go plow and plant.
You've done amazing.
I don't care what the Führer says, and I don't care what Himmler says. Just go do it.
There are hints there, and you've done amazing background on Kammler, and I would say deeper than the official biographers, because of how you track his many different 9 lives, and also his possible destination of his special projects. What's interesting to me when I take a look at that is somebody like Kammler and somebody like von Braun, they operate interesting space where, and you've mentioned this before, that von Braun actually got into trouble at a certain point saying, I want to pursue this for space purposes. I'm not interested in this war stuff. But he was saying it internally, and the Gestapo basically is after him, and he has to be rescued by his boss there.
Right.
And, we think about that and Dornberger's later influence on NASA. I want to kind of track these individuals because I'm seeing that they're stepping outside of even their leadership model, it seems like von Braun against the Fuhrer, and Kammler obviously clearly doing something on his own. So, and he's entrusted also in a way, as you've mentioned, beyond, I mean, Hitler giving him the charge of all these programs is remarkable. So give me Kammler and von Braun, and then we go to, of course, recruit von Braun, and we get his boss, Dornberger, but Kammler is lost in the mix somewhere.
Well, there are people in this country that have argued the case that Kammler was part of the American booty.
Okay, yeah.
There are people that have argued that case. I do not doubt that the United States may have had some contact and kept tabs of Kammler, but I am adamant to this day that the people that concentrate on the American end of the story are subject to one glaring problem. They always overlook Argentina.
Yes,
that's the problem.
And Juan Perón and
Juan Perón and that whole cesspool of junk that's going on in Argentina. The other problem that they overlook is that last Junkers 390, that monstrously large 6-engine long-haul heavy freight aircraft that the Germans had, that Kammler had charge of at the end of the war.
Oh, wow.
Well, yeah, he was in charge of those things.
Would you call it was kind of the ultimate transport plane for the period?
Back then it was, it looks like kind of a B-36 bomber, with 6 engines and this enormous wingspan. You can't miss this puppy, folks. But this thing was capable, definitely, of flying heavy lift flight from Europe to South America. I mean, it was just a long haul aircraft for heavy cargo. The story is that Kammler used that to evacuate the Belle and much of the papers that went with it to not Antarctica, pardon me, to Argentina.
And there's a slip there, right?
There was a slip there. Yeah, don't go there, folks. I'm not going there. But the interesting thing is, the part of the story that people forget is that there are witnesses in Argentina that saw this thing land. And then, of course, this is a ginormous aircraft. So the Argentines literally stripped it. They broke it down and took it apart in order to hide it.
Oh, wow.
The craft landed, offloaded all of its cargo and whatever personnel it had aboard. And then the Argentines took it apart, disappeared it, basically. Yeah. So,
and just jump in with this, go right back to this description, but jump in and tell me, does the Belle, in your opinion, have something in common with what we traditionally know as the unidentified flying object?
Absolutely. Absolutely it does, because the Belle is, the person that broke the Belle story is not me. It's Igor Witkowski.
Yes.
And he broke it in Poland, published in Polish, Oprawda Il Wunderwaffe, or something like that. The truth about the Wunderwaffe. There is an English version available, and it is the book to read on wartime German research, period, bar none. Mr. Witkowski broke the Belle story, and he did so in such a way that there are numerous little details in the story. Its size, its dimensions, the material it's made out of, the fact that it uses 2 counter-rotating drums, the fact that it made a sound that the Germans nicknamed it Der Bienenstock, the beehive. In other words, it buzzed. And that high crackling buzzing sound is very similar to the sound that you hear on tapes of Tesla coils being fired.
Oh, wow,
It's a high voltage switch that's being opened and closed and creating those pulses of direct current, high voltage electricity. So in other words, I'm taking details like that and trying to reverse engineer what's the physics of this thing doing.
Right.
Okay. All the details are provided by Witkowski, not me. What I'm doing is I'm trying to provide the physics details of what all of these things might be and why
it's interpretation.
It's interpretation. Why are they there, and what were the Germans thinking? Well, the bell, one of the things that connects it to the UFO is that, according to Witkowski, the people in the Gross-Rosen concentration camp, which was the camp that provided the labor for this research facility, at night would report seeing little things that looked like barrels emerging above the tree line and hovering there, and it would glow a pale blue glow. So in other words, it's the shape that circumstantially identifies it with the bell. It's the fact that it's levitating and glowing, because there are other little details about the bell when it's being tested below ground that indicate that it could give off a glow very, very rapidly, and that it would create some sort of levitational effect. Because the other thing that is part of these many details is the Germans built a power plant, an electrical power plant, at this facility in the middle of nowhere.
Okay. Yeah. And also the description there of what those prisoners were seeing, classic UFO. How many stories do we have of these orbs that just go up and sit, and glow different colors?
Yeah, here's the key point, though, to remember. It apparently levitated, but that's all it did. It did not zip around and dart around the sky. It created there was some sort of lift effect that was created, but that's all we know. The other thing we know is that when it was first tested, 60 of the scientists involved died.
Oh, right.
Okay. So there was something deadly about this thing. That
some effect coming off of this plasma bell experiment.
Right.
They're able to levitate it, but it causes this kind of human illness thing around the scientists working on it.
I strongly suspect it was very, very high exposure to gamma rays. And the reason I suspect that is, in my reverse engineering, I concluded that at least one of the compounds that they were using to produce the plasma, that they were pulsing with all that high voltage electricity, was an isomer of thorium. Okay. And if you know anything about isomers, they spit out gobs of gamma rays when they are destabilized.
Oh, right.
So if that's what they were doing, you're going to get zapped by some pretty potent, deadly radiation. The other thing, another little detail that is reported about the device is that people that were shielded properly from that effect also experienced metallic taste in their mouths afterward. And if you're familiar with the UFO lore and literature, this is often reported by close contactees with UFOs that experience this metallic taste in their mouths. So there's a lot going on with the Bell story that connects it to all of this. Now, here's the interesting thing.
And we're lucky to have it, because it would have been lost if it wasn't for that whole thing about the division of Germany, after the wall falls and the reunification comes back together, East and West. Then that's where a lot of these court cases and things pop up.
Oh, yes. The reunification of Germany is what really unleashes this torrent of information, because most of the facilities that I'm talking about that are connected to the Bell or to the UFO, the German flying saucer project and so on, or even the rockets, all of those facilities were in what became the Eastern Soviet zone of East Germany. So we don't know about any of it because all of those facilities were behind the Iron Curtain. And on top of that, like many of the facilities that we are aware of that we encountered in Western Germany, the SS booby-trapped those facilities when they closed them down, and the Soviets wouldn't even bother going into them.
Oh, wow.
So in many cases, it took after the war people that would go in and start researching.
And something about the bell, Joseph, required incredible high voltage.
Yeah, it required incredible direct current high voltage. That's why they built a power plant there. Because here's the dirty little secret why Edison lost the power wars in this country. Edison wanted everything to be direct current. Well, if you know anything about direct current, it falls off dramatically.
Yeah.
From the power end to the load end.
Right. So you'd need every couple of miles a different power station just to keep the thing going.
You'd need a power plant,
yeah, right.
to power this stuff, because that's how quickly it falls off. Well, the fact that the Germans built an electrical power plant in the middle of nowhere, where the biggest village nearby is 500 people,
right.
You don't need an electrical power plant for a village. But
so
you do
high
need
experiments.
If you do, if you're dealing with high voltage, direct current electricity in a plasma experiment, you need a power plant.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah, absolutely. Now track the bell for me, since we found out about it in this kind of reverse engineered way after reunification and these other things. There were rumors about it too, but really we didn't get anything solid till then. Now, the bell, basically, it represents a kind of innovation of technology. We also hear about Nazi saucers.
Yes.
And that's something that goes on back there. We've talked about John Warner IV coming on here and saying his grandfather, Paul Mellon, saying he goes over to Germany after the war and he stands on a craft that is a football field and a half in diameter. So there's something there which never made it into the regular record books and standard history at all that's coming out of Nazi Germany.
Most of those saucer stories, if you delve into them, and I have, most of them concern themselves with suctioning the boundary layer, that thin layer of molecules of air on the surface of an airfoil. Most of them have to do with suctioning the boundary layer in a saucer-shaped sinterized metal. Sinterized metal is metal with very, very tiny pores that go all the way through the metal. So you're literally sucking atoms of air in a kind of saucer-shaped jet engine. So in other words, these Nazi saucers are, for the most part, when there are any details about them, they're saucer-shaped suction aircraft, much like the post-war Avro car in Canada that you've seen, floating around. I think that Avro car personally is a bit of a deliberate psyop and distraction.
Right, because they're like, oh, look, we can't get it off the ground.
We can't get it off the ground, and it's not stable. Yeah.
Oh, shoot. Guess those flying saucers don't work.
Don't work. Back to the drawing board. That's what I think happened. There were patents taken out in this country by Germans after the war for, suction-shaped, saucer-shaped suction aircraft. And the United States Air Force, we know this for a fact because we've seen pictures, experimented with the same idea after, and with some fairly big airframes too. So, the idea that the Nazis were doing this is, to me, not all that fanciful. They probably would have encountered the same difficulties with those airframes that we did afterwards. These craft are not the exotic technology like the Bell. The Bell, to me, is the exotic technology par excellence, because it according to the story, it clearly achieves some sort of levitational effect. And even if not, what they were doing in terms of the plasma research in connection to energy sources and so on, I think is rather breathtaking. But the interesting thing about the Bell is I personally have always connected it to the Kecksburg UFO.
Yeah.
In fact, I think I'm probably the only one out there that has has published about it, because the dimensions are the same, the shape is the same, the details of the one are suggestive of the other, like the so-called runes that are on the reported for the Kecksburg acorn. I don't have any difficulty seeing the SS, that's in charge of the Nazi Bell, putting their SS runes and so on and so forth on that piece of equipment. So, even that little detail, I think, can be rationalized. But
Amazing.
For me, the telling detail that connects the two is that the Nazi Bell was housed. The Nazi Bell, I think again, Igor Vitkovsky is correct. It's a kind of jazzed up plasma trap, because the Germans hit on the very happy idea that most plasma traps don't do, of rotating the plasma. And in fact, not only rotating it electrically, but rotating the plasma fuel itself mechanically. Okay. So it's a plasma trap that rotates.
Wow.
Yeah. That's.
And so you have that fundamental working in 1940s Germany. You fast forward to December 65 when the Kecksburg crash happens.
Yeah.
You've got 20 years of development in between.
You've got 20 years of development, and there's a fundamental thing that connects the two.
It's great to see you. I have to say, we might have to be in touch here very shortly, because they're talking about releasing more of this stuff in just a few weeks. So
the UFO stuff or more Jeffrey Epstein stuff?
Right. No, it's the UFO stuff. They claim in a couple of weeks they're going to put it out.
Oh boy.
Jeez. So we might be back right here at this position in just a couple of weeks, if it's possible.
Oh anything's possible. I could drop my pencil and it might fall all the way through the earth. That's possible.
Isn't that tensor physics of some kind?
Well, actually, that was one of the answers that some scientist at the Large Hadron Collider gave to somebody.
That's right. That's right. There's a few books here to recommend on what you put together. Oh, by the way, I forget now, but I learned I came across this woman who had interviewed Jesse Marcel, and just to wrap all this up, at the end of his life, and she was a college student at the time, but she didn't release these tapes and things till just recently, and I went through it, and he made a drawing now of the hieroglyphs, etc., and they looked a lot different than what the son had done, and she noticed that too. Yeah, and he said, Jesse Jr. didn't get it quite right. I'm going to send that to you because I want you to take a look at it. It is very strange, but it is such an unusual list of characters, not very hieroglyphic so much, but I'll send that to you. I'd love to get your response on that.
All right.
Fantastic. It's great to see us, sir, and we'll be in touch. Everyone can go to GizaDeathStar.com for the books, for the background, for the presentations, the blogs. It's all there if anyone wants to get there. Is there anything else you want to add on that?
No, other than join us in a vid chat too.
Absolutely. Joseph, it's great to see you.
Good to see you, sir. Thanks for having me back.
We talk soon.
Yep, bye-bye.